If I just talk a little bit about Liverpool Business School and then my role, if that's okay, and then obviously sort of get down to it. And Liverpool Business School is part of Liverpool John Moores. We're a school of approximately 160 to 170 academics, and it's grown very, very rapidly in the last few years. We've got around about 3,500 to 4,000 students based in Liverpool, and roughly the same amount based around the world. So it's a reasonably large business school. And I tend to focus within the business school on the teaching and learning side, and that's where the simulations come in to make sure that it's a positive and very good learning experience for all of our students. So what we'll be talking about today is really looking at how we make sure that the simulations fit into the teaching and learning experience and become meaningful and become a real success.
Great, thanks, Peter. Yeah, perfect. And we're really delighted to have you, by the way, and really appreciate you giving up your time for this as well. Before we start, just to sort of say, please, expect interactivity today. We've got the chat here. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. If it seems like the question will be kind of addressed later on in the conversation, it's not that I'm ignoring you. I'll just kind of leave that, and hopefully we'll pick that up at some point during the call. Otherwise, we'll also try to leave a good bit of time towards the end as well for questions as well. So please, keep those questions in mind. I'm sure Peter will be delighted to take those. It's also worth mentioning we are recording the session. So yeah, we'll try and share a copy of the recording afterwards to everyone as well. We're going to be covering quite a few topics today. So as we said, looking at simulations at a high level within the business school, we'll be looking at things like consistency of experience in terms of learning resources, thinking about progression and coherency, also scaffolding the theory and skills, thinking about cross-modular learning and how that links to graduate outcomes, but also the efficacy of simulations, so demonstrating efficacy and some of the metrics around perhaps student feedback, but other engagement metrics too. So perhaps before we get into the conversation, it's also nice, especially for some of those attendees who might be a bit newer to simulations, maybe are doing some things perhaps in a more kind of ad hoc way across the business school, but don't have that strategic approach. Maybe it's a good start to just give a little bit of context about Edumundo and our approach really to doing things. Okay, well, Edumundo, although I'm based in the UK, near Bath, actually we're a Dutch company, so headquartered in The Hague in the Netherlands, and we've developed our first management simulation in 2001. So we've really grown a long way since then. Around about 40 employees and working with around 400, usually business schools, but 400 universities worldwide, all over the globe. So we're active in every continent of the world. And we actually also, although higher education is our main focus, we also work with the corporate sector, with the private sector as well. So we're supporting many kind of learning and development teams with some big corporates, as well as their leadership development teams as well. In terms of the simulations, again, just for a bit of context, as you'd expect, whilst we have a wide portfolio of simulations, there are some similarities in terms of how they work operationally. So they're all web-based, for example. There's no need to install software or download plugins. They just work off the browser. So very easy to get started from a technological perspective. They also work on any device. So whilst it's nice for students to kind of share a big screen on a laptop, at the same time, students can log in on their smartphones if they like as well. And typically it works like this. We'll put students into teams of around about 4 or 5 in a team. It's flexible, but students will then manage in their teams a company across a number of rounds, where one round is equal to 1 financial year or 1 year of trading, of operations. And one round usually sits within 1 week of study. So the simulation is therefore mapped across the weeks of teaching within the module or course. Having said that, we are able to also run the simulation in a compressed format, which we often do, for example, on MBA residentials or even induction days as well, where all the rounds will happen within a single day or across a couple of days, for example. From the time investment perspective, well, it depends on the level and also what the expectations are, but typically we find each round can be between an hour and 2 hours, something like that. So perfect for kind of sitting within a workshop or a seminar if you want to have the simulation happening within class, but it's also possible to ask the student teams to work outside of class as well. Really important to say is that within all the simulations we have, it's got this dynamic algorithm, and this is where it means it's really kind of competitive. So every time the simulation runs is a completely unique experience, because the teams are genuinely competing against the other student teams on the same course. So they're not competing against a computer. As such, there's a real sense of realism about the simulation in a kind of real marketplace, where all the teams in this same industry are competing for market share. And as such, that's really what kind of drives the competition and ultimately drives the engagement. We cater for all student levels. So right from kind of foundation level right through to exec level and MBA level, for example. A number of the simulations are also highly flexible, although it's a bit nuanced in terms of how that works and the flexible nature of some of the components. But also some of the simulations are more flexible than others. So it kind of depends on which one you use. Perhaps at a high level as well, just some big sort of why management simulations. Typically what we find is that, you know, it's all about trying to improve student engagement. And of course, at a high level, the satisfaction as well. Often we find that this can, where used strategically, simulations can be placed on specific modules or programs in order to try to help improve continuation rates, progression rates, retention, of course, as well as the employability skills. So whilst in the simulations, we don't deal with the skills from a theoretical standpoint, that is a huge byproduct, of course, of the students working in their teams, negotiating with each other on their chosen strategy, working to deadlines, project managing what they have to do, allocating roles and responsibilities, but also undertaking a range of analysis on the data. So really good for kind of promoting those competencies and skills and linking to graduate outcomes. What we often see as well is where we have, especially where we have these kind of strategic partners in place, is that often the simulations are used and fed back into the kind of recruitment process as well. So for example, you know, a nice video of students using the simulations will be played at the open days, for example, to really sort of showcase what students are doing and trying to entice students into the university as part of the offer. Okay, well, perhaps just to finish off a little bit on this introduction, is just to say that we have a wide portfolio of simulations, and we often are able to, you know, as a result, fit with most subjects within the business school. So here's an example of some of the courses where we often work with our simulations. If you're interested afterwards, of course, please get in touch, and we'll be delighted to have a kind of a one-on-one conversation with you to see how we can align and map the simulations to your course. Okay, well, let's stop there and yeah, bring you in, Peter. So yeah, once again, really delighted that you could carve out some time in your busy schedule for this. I know we've got loads of people on the call who are delighted to hear from you. Perhaps before we start with questions specifically, maybe yeah, maybe if you want to give people a sort of overview of the project, or I suppose the partnerships that we have in place with John Moores and how it works in a kind of nutshell.
Yeah, no problem at all. And thank you so much for inviting me, Lee. I'm absolutely delighted to be here and talk about how we use simulations and how we're using them to grow the business school. I think when we first started looking at simulations, there were 5 questions that we asked ourselves. And the first and the most important one was, why are we using the simulations, and how can they make sure that we have a coherent offer? And for me, that's absolutely key. For me, the simulations are not there as a standalone project. They're not there as something that we just do because it's a fun activity and students are engaged in it. We do it because we know you can create a coherent program with simulations at the center of it. So what we did is we looked to introduce simulations throughout our program. So there is this strand running all the way through from the foundation year through to the master's study. So at the start, of course, students sort of dabbled in it a little bit, just got the basics, looked at the more general points of business. By the time they're at master's study, they can look at a very specific focus and actually use that as part of their studies. So the first question was, how can we make it coherent? And the answer was to have this as a key strand in all of our programs. The second thing, and a lot of our students are local, so a lot of our students are from the Merseyside area, from Liverpool itself. And I think one of the key things we were looking at was to try to make sure that we gave them an experience that they maybe hadn't had at school, and wouldn't get at maybe some of the other universities. And what this gave us was the opportunity to get students to apply the skills that they learned. More and more students are looking for a university experience rather than just a degree. And this fits in very nicely indeed. I think there is sometimes a tendency at the start of any course for students to look at the course and think, what do we need to do to pass? What are the assessments? And I wanted to get away from that and give them that full experience. And hence the assessment falls in as a natural part of the course rather than something that they really focus on. So it was the second question, the second point was, how could we give students that experience? The third point, you've already alluded to this, was how do we make sure we have positive graduate outcomes? Within English higher education, that's a key metric for us. And what we want to do is to make sure that when our graduates leave, they not only have the theoretical knowledge, but they can apply it. And hence simulations work really nicely, simply because they can say that they have had experience, they have applied the knowledge, and as it is a competition, sometimes they might even have won that particular competition. The fourth part that we looked at was looking at the skills students need. Within many compulsory education systems, students tend to be quite passive in nature. So at A levels in the UK, there is a focus on learning knowledge, repeating knowledge, and the teacher being the font of all knowledge. We want to move away from that and make sure that students could do things for themselves, make sure that they have that active learning. And simulations are a great opportunity to do that. So what we did was we made a shift from a very lecturer teacher centered approach to one which is far more student centered. So we might well come into this later on in our chat. But the role of the teacher, the role of the lecturer has changed significantly. And instead of being that sort of the sage on the stage, they become the guide on the side. And what you actually do is you put more focus on student learning. The fifth and final question we asked ourselves was, how does this fit in with the overall student, and the student actually sort of having a positive experience at Liverpool Business School? Because it's all very well giving people the skills, but we also want them to enjoy things. And we want them to actually sort of create that, have that thirst for knowledge. And that's where the simulation comes in very nicely. Because of its complexity, there's always questions to be asked, and there's always that reflection. And what we tend to do is we try to get students not only to do the simulation, but most importantly to reflect on what they've learned. And we sometimes have students coming to us and say, well, we finished last, we completely messed up the marketing, it was awful, I couldn't work with one of the members of my group, it was a disaster. And in many cases, that is a gift, because that will happen in business, that will happen. And actually, it's the reflection for me, which is so important when using a simulation, because it's great when things go well, and that creates some good reflections. But if it doesn't, you can learn so much. So we're removing that fear of failure from students, and we're actually getting them to focus on what happened, why it happened, and then planning for the future. So for me, those are the 5 key points and key reasons why we're looking, why we have no regrets at introducing simulations across the programs.
Okay, well, yeah, that's really great, Peter, and I think that's a really good introduction to kind of the sort of holistic view of everything and the approach really in terms of the embedding simulations across the business school. Perhaps just to pick out on a couple of those points before we move on to some other things is, I guess, well, taking your last point, I suppose, about the overall student experience and asking students to kind of reflect on things. I guess this also links a little bit to what you started talking about by kind of making it a key strand in all programs. But I suppose that also, well, I'm using my own words here, but making sure it's not a kind of bolt-on activity. It's not whilst maybe an extracurricular opportunity to participate in something is nice. What we're talking about here is something that's really embedded into the into the program, and of course linked to the assessment as well, right?
That's exactly it. It needs to be central. It works. It's fine. It's a if I might sort of say, it's a fun activity for people to do. But actually, if you treat it as simply this bolt-on, it becomes just something that students do and then forget about. If you actually put it as central to a module, then students have what we tend to term as immersive activity. And the assessment becomes very much linked to the simulation. So instead of students looking at it and thinking, I've got an assessment to be completed in week 12, I need to make sure I focus on that. The assessment is from the start, from week 1 all the way through to week 12. And that makes it far more meaningful. That's the key. That's the key for me, that it needs to be central to the learning experience. I mean, we've got a lot of quantitative evidence that we know that modules that have introduced the simulations have significantly improved their module evaluations. And first of all, that's down to some excellent teaching, and I can see Constantina and a few others actually on the call who extremely skilled practitioners, but it's also due to making sure that the curriculum is relevant to the students and making sure that the students become part of that journey. It's fascinating. And just to bring in another point, and one of our inspirations is, I think it's the University of Maastricht that actually organizes everything around problem solving and solving issues within seminars. And in many ways, that's been an inspiration for us, that we're throwing it back to the students and saying, you have all of the knowledge inside you. We will give you this vehicle to apply that knowledge. Go away and show us what you've got.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, that's really strong. And well, just picking up a couple of things as well, other things that you mentioned already was around, I was really interested to go a bit deeper into what you mentioned about giving students experiences that they haven't had, especially those local students perhaps. But it's kind of like an age-old issue, isn't it, where we've got lots of especially younger students who start, maybe 18-year-olds who might start a course. They're expected then to kind of learn all about these different subjects that they ultimately have no experience in. And so I kind of always feel like, until you've got a bit of context to know where that kind of theory can relate to, then it can be quite difficult to kind of make sense of that. So I guess that's a part of it, but also something that you mentioned as a different point was also at the other end then, which is making sure that students have those skills that they can then go on to get graduate employment with as well. So it's kind of the two ends of the spectrum. When they're starting at the institution and when they're finishing their degree, it's all about like experience, isn't it?
It is about experience, and you're absolutely right about the students. I mean, I'm often in awe of our students, what they've come through and the battles that they fought to actually come into higher education. And the reality is that what education is a transformative process. For me, the reason to go to university is to improve yourself, is to learn about yourself, and to give yourself those life opportunities. And by using things such as simulations, and we do other things, our international programs, and make sure we've got links outside the Liverpool city region, we're giving them those necessary skills and giving them those necessary experiences that they wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere. I come back to one of my points that within the school system, it is very much focused within the classroom, and we want to get beyond the classroom. And although that's not sometimes physically possible to go into loads of companies, simulations give you that opportunity to go into companies without actually leaving your seat.
Well, absolutely, yeah, and yeah, I suppose on that note as well, well, you're probably aware, Peter, is from some of the courses you've been involved with as well, is that we introduced something about a year ago, maybe a bit more, where we now, for all our clients, we also issue these certificate kind of completion certificates, but also winners and runners up certificates to all the attendees as well. And that's quite nice because it also means the students can sort of share those on LinkedIn and kind of boost their online CVs, which, well, LinkedIn seems to be the modern day version of a CV these days, isn't it? And that's quite nice. That's kind of welcomed by most of our clients these days.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's also about making sure that they build up that profile as well. I keep coming back to graduate outcomes, and I keep coming back to employability skills, but it is so key within British higher education at the moment that what we're constantly trying to do is to make sure that these students will walk into graduate level jobs when they're finished. And as you say, LinkedIn profiles, the ability to show that you've achieved something is great stuff and really good. Yeah. When it comes to
no, absolutely, and it is an experience you can kind of, you can refer to in interview as well, if there's in lieu of having direct experience within a real company as well.
Yeah,
so I was also keen to just explore a little bit what you mentioned about I think it was the fourth point you mentioned about, well, linked to kind of becoming more student centered, and then, well, this business of kind of, rather than sage on the stage, it's the guide on the side, sort of the lecturer as the facilitator. I'm interested to know, and perhaps some of the attendees are as well, does that, at a high level, Peter, do you think that approach requires a big shift in the kind of institutional mentality a little bit, or is it very much something that's just left down to individuals to kind of take on?
It's an institutional shift. You're absolutely right, and it's got to be a positive decision, I think, from the university or from the school. We, as the leadership team, we sat down a few years ago and just looked to see what sort of business school we wanted, and the business school we wanted was one where people are empowered to do things that they want to do, which are in the interests of the students. So I think the key here is to trust the staff, trust the academics, and trust the process. And of course, for me, I always see my job as trying to remove barriers for people, because people have the most phenomenal ideas. And I think sometimes to assume that because you're in a leadership position, you have all of the answers is both incorrect and possibly a little bit arrogant, really. And I think for me, the ideas are the people come from the people who are closest to the students. So although it is sometimes tempting to go with a very traditional hierarchical model and say, look, you must have a 1 hour lecture, you must then have a 2 hour seminar and a 1 hour tutorial or whatever it might be. I think what we're trying to do is to say what works best for students. We are in an incredibly exciting era for me. We have artificial intelligence, which seems to be changing weekly. We have virtual reality, augmented reality. We have all of these opportunities. And I think we need to make sure that our academics are able to explore those opportunities, because the students will know about them and the students will be expecting us to be doing these things. And local businesses, international businesses will also be expecting our graduates to become the experts in the in modern techniques. And so I think the decision we made several years ago was to go for this empowered model where academics can try things themselves. And of course, it's removing that fear. Sometimes people try things and it doesn't work. And I think it's removing that fear that they're going to be in all sorts of trouble if they give something a go and it doesn't quite work. As with the simulations, what we try to do is we run a teaching and learning enhancement fund, for example, and all we ask is for people to come back to us and say what happened and feedback to the rest of the school. And if it all goes horribly wrong, actually we can all learn from all of that, so the next person won't make the same mistakes. And the use of simulations requires academics to have the confidence to say to students, you get on with it. We're here to support you, but you have the answers, and I will help you unpick things, but I'm not going to sort of tell you about Porter's five forces or whatever it might be. And that requires, I think, confidence that you're going to be supported and confidence you're going to be backed up. And that's the sort of business school I want to work in, and that's the business school that we talked about several years ago.
Yeah, well, and in the same way, I suppose. Well, by the way, it's nice. Yeah, really good to hear that the kind of the academics are given that sort of freedom and that trust as well to just get on with things and try new things as well. And that fear of failure is perhaps removed a little bit. But actually, that kind of links nicely back to the student experience within the simulations as well, because that's kind of what it's all also about for the students in the simulation. It's not that there's a right or wrong answer necessarily. It's about trying things out and getting that experience, learning from mistakes, and then reflecting on that as your academics are reflecting on that back to management as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also about making sure that students are aware that university should be, in my opinion, more than just about the final certificate, more than just about getting your 2-1 or whatever you actually get. It's about that experience. And I think one of the things we've been trying to do is to improve that communication with students. I know there's all sorts of discussion about what the role of students should be within a university, but for me, they're a co-creator of the experience. I always say at my welcome talks that if we are to create excellence, we've got to be excellent and you've got to be excellent, because actually if one or other isn't, the thing falls apart. So I think for me, the student experience is this co-created journey through through their degree or through their master's study, whatever it might be. And we ask our students, just tell us how we're doing, tell us what they want, tell us if they're enjoying things, and in return we'll tell them how they're doing and what we want from them, and between us we come up with this journey rather than again create something that's either hierarchical or alternatively just sort of saying yes to things.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, anyway, halfway through, 30 minutes in or so, so perhaps just I'll take a moment just to kind of, I've noticed quite a lot of late joiners, so welcome to everyone who's also joined since I introduced. Very welcome, and it's really great you could carve some time out to join us today. Just as a reminder, we're joined by Peter Wolstencroft at Liverpool John Moores University, at Liverpool Business School. And the conversation's all about, of course, deploying simulations across multiple programs within the business school as part of a strategic initiative. So I was also keen to hear your thoughts, Peter. I know we've talked about this a little bit in the past about, working towards this consistency of experience using learning resources. Could you tell us a bit more about your thoughts on that and what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, well, first of all, as I mentioned before, what we do is we make sure that we've got simulations across each of the programs at each of the levels. And I think there is always a purpose for the simulation. I think it's sometimes the mistake that maybe we made right at the start is to say, right, we'll have a simulation at level 4, level 5 and level 6, but not necessarily thinking about why it's at level 4, why it's at level 5 and why it's at level 6, what the focus is. So what we tend to do now is that the module leaders will talk to each other and make sure that there isn't that repetition. the baseline is set at either the foundation year or in level 4. But in level 5 and level 6, there needs to be a purpose for doing the simulation. There needs to be a focus. And for me, that's a key part of that coherency and a key part of that consistency. We also try to make sure it's very much linked to their program. So, for example, an international tourism student would get something different out of it to maybe a business with international business management student. So, to return to the first point, the reasons we're doing a simulation is that creates a strand which links all of their learning and means that they can make sense of all of the learning that they're actually doing. But again, it's communication is the key. We need to make sure that our module leaders talk to each other and explain exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, and that we've got a rationale for doing it at each particular level.
Well, I know, yeah, one of the things that's good about having the sort of high level bird's eye view as well of everything, and a sort of strategic partnership such as the one we have, is that we can kind of avoid any risk of perhaps duplication or risk of discontinuity in the experience, I suppose, as well. So at an obvious level, perhaps, you know, students doing the same simulation in semester 1 and semester 2, for example, you know, that same group of students. So, but it's also more than that as well, isn't it? It's not just, well, of course that is something we need to avoid, but if we didn't have that communication between departments, you know, academics talking to each other, but also that whole holistic view, then there is risk of that sort of thing happening, isn't there? If academics are kind of just doing their own thing and coming to suppliers and engaging with suppliers and choosing different resources, perhaps there is this kind of that risk of discontinuity in experience, I suppose.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's why we always see our relationship with Edumundo as a partnership rather than just us, you know, asking you for a simulation, really. And I know we're going to have conversations in the next few weeks about next year. And the idea behind it is to make sure we can map all of the simulations across all of the business school and see if there's repetition, how we can remove repetition, and where there's gaps, how we can fill gaps. And I think for me, it's that two-way relationship which works well. So I know last year, as an example, one of the things that our students were struggling with was the transition from compulsory education to post-compulsory education, and the traditional 1 week induction just does not work anymore, in our opinion, for students. So although we've now got a far more extended induction over 6 weeks, it's still something that is a concern, not least with students who have come through the pandemic and have had some disruption to their education. So I know we worked together on an app which linked students together before they started at John Moores, and meant that A, they had a social group, but B, we could feed through information about what the university is like, what they should be prepared for. And so when they stepped through the doors at the Redmonds building in Liverpool, they weren't just overwhelmed, but they knew, you know, a few dozen people, and they knew what to expect. So I think I come back to that strand. I come back to the fact that we need to create that coherency, and having that two-way relationship creates that coherency and means that we're doing things for a reason rather than because it's a good product, if that makes sense.
Well, that's really great to hear, Peter. And yeah, well, we feel the same way, of course. And you know, I think just to make it clear to everyone on the call now, you know, on the session, all our participants, whilst the focus of this session is on the management simulations, the business simulations, what Peter was just referring to there was this it's a bit separate. It's a separate product line that we offer at Edumundo called the Brightbirds app. And this is often, well, it's an engagement app, a smartphone app, but it's often used to support the extended induction for new students. So the pre-boarding and onboarding experience. And it's typically something which we're finding most HE institutions are looking at now, really trying to make huge inroads into into preparing students for that transition into HE, and not placing so much emphasis on that traditional kind of welcome week or welcome fortnight, and really elongating that whole process out. So great you mentioned that as well, Peter, and we're delighted that we're working together with you on that as well, and looking forward to growing that over the coming years as well. I suppose what's really interesting as well is what we've just talked about a little bit is sort of around this consistency in experience. You mentioned a couple of other things as well about, I suppose, customization in terms of, well, not customization, but I suppose making sure that the simulations are appropriate also for the specialisms as well. So if you've got students, I think you used the example of tourism tourism and hospitality, for example, then we're also giving those students a bit of a different experience as well. So that's one part of it. But then it's also about ensuring that as students progress up those layers, those academic levels each year, that they're also then going into kind of an appropriate level of both application of theoretical knowledge as well as skills acquisition as well. So yeah,
I think that's it, and it's strange for me, Leon. This is the most exciting time in higher education I've known in 20-25 years in it, and the student experience is changing at such a rapid rate that we need to be on top of it. We need to be ahead of the game, and we're planning for next year at the moment, and we're looking at how do we integrate things such as artificial intelligence and virtual reality into all of the programs, and we're doing it not because wearing sort of Oculus headsets or whatever is fun. I mean, it is, but it's what will be happening when our students go into the world of work. We had a postgraduate open day last night, and chatting to a lot of the people coming in and a lot of the employers, their number one issue was, are the students going to be okay with artificial intelligence? Because we've started using it in the businesses. Are they actually going to sort of be able to be the leaders when they join the companies? And that is a challenge for universities, because we are built for maybe more traditional ways of learning, and we have to be. The word that we often use is we have to be agile. And actually having things like simulations and making sure the simulations are changing to reflect the current environment is absolutely key. I think there are a number of other challenges we've got. I know, looking at people on the call, there are a lot of academics representing universities who have a high number of collaborative students all over the world. And given that the Office for Students have said that the student experience needs to be consistent, not just in your home university, but also in the collaborations, this creates massive challenges for university leadership. And I think it's about these tools that we're talking about give the opportunity to have consistency around the globe, but also have that personalization. I know this sounds like a contradiction, but for me it's not. You can have consistency of experience, but each student can get what they need out of that experience. So whether it be AI, whether it be VR, or whether it be simulations, actually putting them into the program and explaining why they're there means that not only can students have a positive student experience, but from the Office for Students perspective, they can see exactly what we're doing to ensure that our collaborative students have that experience as well.
Well, yeah, for sure. There's so much change happening in the landscape, and on the horizon as well in the higher education sector. So it's really great that you've addressed some of those things. I was actually presenting at a conference online just last Friday on AI and the implications of that in terms of the future of assessment, for example, and there was all sorts of implications that we were talking about, and also how that links to simulations as well, and how kind of simulations in a way kind of future proofs the university experience from AI, and the impact then on, well, cheating within, assessments, for example. So that was really interesting. But, you've mentioned, well, loads of really insightful points there. I think also kind of technology in terms of VR and other things generally. I'm also really interested in thinking about the use of simulations from the perspective of not only traditional on-campus use, but also where they're used online and with international partners, for example. So the use of simulations across different institutions together, and that sort of, the benefits that can bring in terms of experience, but also actually just trying to simulate the kind of the real world of future work that we're going to ask our graduates to be part of. So at a basic level, if we can say to students who are online, well, get together in your teams in your own time on Zoom or Teams or whichever online meeting platform you want to, and share your screens, have those discussions. That's exactly what the students will be doing in the real world of work, isn't it? And also managing different time zones and these sorts of things.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely, you're absolutely right, and it's absolutely fascinating. As I mentioned, a lot of our students are local to Liverpool, and actually these tools give the opportunity to connect with people from all over the world because they're all doing the same thing. And it was fantastic at the start of this webinar. I was just looking to see where people were from, and we're connecting with people from a vast number of countries, and this is exactly what, as a university, we should be doing. The fact that we have students who are based in Liverpool does not negate the fact that they will be working with people. Just taking a few examples from the chat, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from Connecticut, wherever it might be, and this is giving the opportunity to broaden horizons. I think a point we've made again and again from the business school is it's all about applying that knowledge and future-proofing that knowledge and making sure our students are confident in what they do and confident in meeting the new challenges, because we don't know what new technology there'll be in the next few years. So what we have to do is to make sure that when a new technology comes in, students have the experience and have the confidence to deal with it and make their own judgments.
Absolutely, yeah. And by the way, just a really nice point there from Neslihan as well. Important for business schools to have real world relevance in teaching and learning. Yeah, so absolutely agree, Neslihan. So thanks for that. I suppose, well, there's so much to discuss, of course. I've just noticed another point there from Vivian Neal as well, just shifting the narrative away from a negative threat response to AI. And a link to something there, an article you wrote. Thanks, Vivian, for that. Yes, absolutely, completely agree. And actually a big part of what my presentation was all about was exactly that, really, sort of focusing on the positives of AI and how that actually can be sort of used as a kind of bouncing ideas back and forth, and how it should be kind of shifted into just being considered as a productivity tool going forward, something that we can build into having good sort of technology quotient or good employability skills. Yeah.
I just picking up on that, actually, Leon, I totally agree with what Vivian's saying. I look forward to reading the article a bit later on. And actually, these tools give our students so many possibilities. So, for example, I mean, we've been exploring the way in which we can use AI to help students structure their dissertations, because it's something students struggle with a lot. But actually, you can use these tools to show how it needs to be structured, and that's a step forward. Actually, just on another note, I'm not totally sure if I'm supposed to be revealing this, but we're looking at our AI policy within Liverpool John Moores, and we're actually thinking about using AI to write the AI policy and see what it comes up with as a starting point.
Good plan. Yeah. One of the things we'd also said we were going to discuss was around sort of cross-modular learning. And I mean, it'd be interesting to hear your take on this, but at the same time, perhaps just to introduce my thoughts a little bit, is that whilst the simulation will usually, as we've discussed, kind of sit across the semester within, really embedded within the teaching and learning, within the module and linked to the assessment. And whilst the simulations will often kind of be specifically relevant to that specific module or course that it sits on, at the same time, what we're always trying to do is to do that in the context of both the wider business, so bringing everything together, helping students to see how that subject then interrelates to, well, all of the other departments within a business, but also between the siloed kind of courses or modules within a program as well. Is that your kind of understanding of cross-modular learning, or is it something a little bit else?
Absolutely, and I think for me this is the holy grail. If we can crack this, we have a truly integrated, connected business school. We're doing a little bit of work with we're in the Faculty of Business and Law, so we're doing a little bit of work with the law school to try to get more connections with law. But within the business school, I would love to have far more cross-modular learning and make sure that we can actually learn from each other. We've tried to start this process. We've done it in a very sort of light touch. So, for example, we do some social events where people from various programs can meet and sort of mingle a little bit more rather and get out of their silos. But long term, the goal will be to make sure that we have a business school which everybody is part of, and actually there's far more linking between our accounting and finance students and our HRM students and so on. I would also like to see this extended to our collaborative partners as well. We're doing a little bit of work with a partner in India, and they send some of their students over for an immersive week, which has proved a great success because it links people studying many thousands of miles away with people who are studying in Liverpool. And I think we haven't cracked it yet, but that is the goal.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm aware of the time. We've just gone past sort of 10 minutes before we'll draw to a close. So perhaps that's a good opportunity for me to encourage anyone to put some questions in the chat if you'd like to ask Peter anything. But whilst perhaps we're waiting for some questions to come in, maybe if we also I think there was one other part to the kind of points that we were going to discuss, which was also about this kind of school-wide approach to improving module feedback and student engagement. I think we've kind of covered that a little bit already, but maybe, I don't know if you have any sort of more comments on that from a kind of school-wide perspective.
Yeah, this is something I think most of HE is wrestling with, that students see assessment and see engagement as a process which is almost like a series of hurdles to jump. I did a bit of research which basically confirmed lots of the other research out there that students very rarely read any feedback or feed forward. I think out of our level 4s, it was somewhere in the region of about a third actually opened the feedback. So with apologies for any academics on the call who've spent hours and hours sort of slaving over assessments and writing detailed feedback, the reality is that the majority of students do not read the feedback. So part of that process is about seeing assessment in a standalone basis and moving that from that standalone to something which is part of their whole program, part of the learning. And simulations work very nicely because it is sort of an assessment really from start to finish. But it's about making sure that students see why we are doing things and actually getting their buy-in. Again, I don't think we've cracked it, and I try to tour the country to see universities that have done particularly good jobs, and I've seen some great examples of authentic assessment, actual live briefs, and assessment which is sort of almost like hidden within seminars. But I think as a sector, it's something we need to do better and something that we need to educate students about. That for undergraduates, as ever, it's the National Student Survey that delivers the verdict about whether we're doing a good job or not. And it's sometimes very difficult because it's tempting to just say yes to students. And I don't think that's the right way of going about it. The way of going about it is to make sure that we're constantly talking to students, explaining what they do, what we're doing, listening to their concerns. They listen to our concerns, and assessment should be in the center of those conversations. And all too often it's not, but we are working towards improving that.
Well, yeah, but on the subject of, so, well, very UK centric, of course, the National Student Survey, the NSS, which measures, of course, at a high level the students' overall university experience. Is that kind of too far removed for you to get a good sense of, how the simulations are adding value, and therefore is it more about the internal module surveys, the student surveys you're doing per module, per course kind of thing?
Yeah, for me, the internal ones are a great source of information, and also various focus groups that we do, because students enjoy the simulations. That's the bottom line. They like doing it. They like it as a way of learning, and it's the jump we're making, and the jump we're trying to ensure all students make, is to show them why we are doing that simulation and what it's giving them. And that, of course, will feed into metrics such as the NSS, but it's the immediacy that I like. I have probably a horrible tendency, my colleagues will say, of just sort of talking to students randomly at our coffee shop at our building, and just sort of talking to them about their program and talking to them about what they like, what they don't like, and just getting the feeling of how their experience is. And students always mention simulations in a positive manner, and I think the jump that the great academics who are doing this are making is that they're explaining the purpose of the simulation. They're not just saying do this, they're saying this is the application of theory to practice. This is your opportunity to show and learn what you are doing. And I think it was Dr. Asif in the chat who was saying that simulations can bridge the gap between theory and practice. And for me, it's spot on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, completely. But, and it's great, of course, that you also managed to find time to have those sort of one-to-one conversations with students. Of course, there's, behind all of the metrics and all the data is, well, our real students, of course, with real kind of thoughts and experiences. And so it's actually really great to capture the kind of anecdotal feedback behind the data, but of course at the same time, well, of course data is important, and higher education leadership is all about kind of is a lot about using data to inform and to make decisions as well, of course.
It is, absolutely, but for me, you're right, it's about the people behind the data. And I try to spend minimal time in my office, simply because if you're in the office, you're probably staring at a spreadsheet, and you're probably sort of focusing on numbers, which of course are important. But for me, if you talk to students, if you go to that coffee shop and bump into colleagues and just sort of see how things are going, actually, that's what makes a good business school. That's what makes a positive environment. Because it becomes human, and it does feed through to the metrics, and that's great. I mean, certainly it's important for Liverpool Business School to be high up in league tables and to have positive feedback, but it's the student experience which is the vital thing, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, that's really great to hear. And by the way, before we draw to a close, perhaps it might be nice if I take an opportunity just to mention that we will have our next webinar on the 13th, Thursday, the 13th of April, 2 p.m. GMT. It'd be great for anyone who's here, if you're interested, to join that. It's all about actually using simulations, really experiential learning, specifically to kind of address business subjects, but within non-business subjects. So, those kind of, well, in this case, kind of the more arts and science type subjects, which are also, where business is also an important part of that as well. So we're going to be really delighted to have Edwin Feary join us from the University of Arts London, who is using our marketing simulation with his students. Well, we're really at the top of the hour now, but if you have any, we're always keen to keep the conversation going. So if anyone here has any thoughts or questions based on what we've discussed today, please get in touch. Feel free to go on our website, and you can use the contact form there to address any questions, and someone will respond. My email address is there as well if anyone's wants to reach out directly to me. Peter, I'm sure you're always delighted for people to get in touch as well. How can people reach you?
Absolutely. And so I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. That's always the best place to contact me, or alternatively, just drop me an email as well. I'll put my email in the chat in a minute. And if anybody does want to chat about simulations or come up to Liverpool, then just say and keep in touch.
Great. All right. Well, thanks, Peter. And really appreciate you. Yeah, once again, massive thank you for putting some time aside today. I know you're busy, so really appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to catching up soon.
No problem at all. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining as well. It's been really great to have such a great turnout. As I say, get in touch afterwards. You can reply to a webinar related email if you like, or you can get in touch with us directly. That's fine.